It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I walked into Grandma's old house. The rain was coming down in thick sheets, the kind that makes everything feel colder than it really is. The house, once full of life, now felt like a relic of the past. Paint was peeling from the walls, and the wooden floor creaked with every step. Even though I knew my grandmother's health was getting worse, I hadn't visited much lately. It wasn't that I didn't love her, but life had gotten in the way. Work, school, friends. There was always something else to do. As I stepped inside, the familiar smell of dust and old wood hit me. I noticed a few pictures on the walls, faded with age. My grandma had always been proud of the little things, her garden, the old photos of her younger years, and the knickknacks she had collected over time. The kind of things that didn't matter to anyone else but her. My cousins had often made fun of her for being stuck in the past. We all did, really. She didn't use smartphones or know anything about social media. And she had these strange old-fashioned ways of talking, like a different time was still alive in her. I didn't blame them for making fun of her. She never seemed to fit in with the rest of us, always a little out of place. I could see why the rest of the family found it so easy to dismiss her. But that didn't stop the guilt from settling in. The idea that maybe, just maybe, I had been just as cruel. I thought back to the times when Grandma had tried to tell us stories about her youth, how she traveled with my grandpa to distant places, how they built this house together, how she used to be full of laughter and joy. None of us had ever paid attention. We were all too busy, too wrapped up in our own lives, to listen. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear the soft sound of Grandma humming from the living room. It was one of those melodies that felt both familiar and forgotten. I paused for a moment, unsure of how to approach her. I hadn't really spoken to her in weeks, maybe even months. The guilt was heavy, but I shrugged it off. Maybe this time I would listen. After all, she was family. When I stepped into the living room, she was sitting in her favorite armchair, her hands folded in her lap. Her silver hair was tied back in a simple bun, and her glasses rested on the tip of her nose. She looked up at me and smiled warmly, as though the years hadn't passed at all. "There you are," she said softly, her voice crackling like old paper. "I've been waiting for you." I felt a sudden rush of emotion. I had always taken her for granted, assumed she'd be around forever, like all grandparents do. Now, seeing her sitting there, frail and quiet, made me realize just how much time I had wasted. I couldn't remember the last time we had really talked. The kind of conversation that meant something. The kind of conversation that would matter when she was gone. "Sorry, Grandma," I said, sitting down across from her. "I should have visited more." She smiled again, that same soft, knowing smile. "It's all right, dear. You're here now." We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound coming from the ticking of an old clock on the wall. I found myself looking around at all the old things in the room. Some of them I'd seen 100 times before, but today they seemed different, as if they were part of a story I didn't fully understand. The room was filled with the kind of warmth that you couldn't get from modern homes, full of cold, sleek furniture. Grandma's house was alive with memories, and for the first time, I saw it. I really saw it. "Grandma," I started hesitantly, "do you ever regret not leaving us more?" She looked at me with those wise, quiet eyes. "More," she repeated. "My dear, what you call more is not what you need. The world doesn't need more things. It needs more kindness, more understanding, more love. And that's what I have always tried to give." I didn't know how to respond. Grandma had always been wise, but today her words seemed to carry a deeper meaning, one I hadn't fully grasped until now. As I sat there, listening to her, I realized how little I had really understood about her life. And I wasn't sure why, but something told me that this visit would be different, that this time, things would change. The next few days were a blur. I spent a lot of time with Grandma, just sitting by her side while she told me stories. At first, I wasn't sure what to expect. Her voice was slow, sometimes hard to understand. but every word felt important, like she was sharing pieces of herself that had been hidden for years. I didn't realize how much I had missed until I started listening. It was almost like she had been waiting for me to finally pay attention. Grandma talked about her youth, about the places she had traveled before she settled down in this house. She spoke of her childhood, of growing up in a small village where everyone knew everyone's business, but it was a place full of kindness. She shared stories about my grandpa, about how they met in a bustling city when they were young. He was the most handsome man I'd ever seen, she said, her eyes lighting up as if she was seeing him all over again. He smiled at me, and I knew my life would change. I hadn't heard these stories before. We had never sat down and talked like this. I heard snippets, maybe at family dinners or in passing, but never like this, like she was revealing a part of herself that no one had really taken the time to see. The more she talked, the more I realized how much I had missed. I never knew the woman who had lived before she became just grandma to me. I had always thought of her as someone who didn't fit into the world we lived in, someone out of touch, but I was starting to see that I had been wrong. She told me about her struggles too, how hard it was to raise a family, how she had worked multiple jobs to make sure her children had enough. She spoke of sacrifices, of putting others before herself, and of the dreams she had put on hold to build a life for her loved ones. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. She had lived through difficult times, but she had never complained. She just kept going, day after day, doing the best she could. Life doesn't always give you what you want, dear, she said one afternoon, as we sat by the window, watching the rain fall outside. But you make do with what you have, and you keep going. That's what keeps you going. I sat there, feeling both ashamed and amazed. Ashamed because I had been so quick to dismiss her, to laugh at her old-fashioned ways, when in reality, she had experienced more than I ever had. And amazed because, despite everything, she had never let go of her kindness. Even after all the hard times, she still found the strength to smile and to give. One evening, as I was helping her with her medicine, she took my hand in hers and looked up at me with those soft, gray eyes. "I want you to promise me something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let the world harden you. Don't let it steal your heart. Stay kind, no matter how hard it gets. Always be the one to give, not the one who takes." Those words stayed with me long after I left her room. I had always been taught to look out for myself, to protect my own interests first. But now, I was hearing a different kind of wisdom. I started to wonder if maybe I had been wrong all along. Maybe my approach to life, always thinking about what I could get, wasn't the right one. Maybe there was something more to living a good life than just getting ahead. Maybe it was about helping others, about being kind even when it was hard. The next few days passed quickly. Grandma's health seemed to worsen, but she was still sharp, still full of stories, still teaching me things I hadn't realized I needed to know. She would tell me little bits of advice here and there, like how to make the perfect cup of tea, or the best way to plant flowers in the garden. Simple things, but they felt like treasures. I began to understand just how much she had lived, how much she had given, and how little I had truly appreciated it. As the days turned into weeks, I started to change. I wasn't the same person who had walked into her house, dismissing her as old and out of touch. I was learning, and for the first time, I was starting to see my grandmother for who she really was, not just the sweet, frail old lady everyone had taken for granted, but a woman with a past, with wisdom, and with a heart that had never stopped giving. It was another Sunday afternoon, and the house was filled with the usual noise of family gathering together. My cousins were there, my aunts and uncles too, all huddled around the old dining table, eating and chatting. The atmosphere was tense, though. There was something about today that felt off, even though no one was saying anything directly. We were all waiting for something, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Grandma had been in and out of the hospital recently, and her health seemed to be slipping away faster than any of us had expected. The doctors had given her only a few more months, if that. I knew the family was starting to wonder what would happen next, what would happen to her house, to the things she had kept for so many years, to the little fortune she had carefully saved. Everyone talked about it, though no one dared to bring it up directly with her. It was like they were all waiting for the inevitable, and when it came, they would have their say about what they thought she had left behind. I sat in the corner, trying to tune out the conversations that surrounded me. My cousins were laughing loudly, making jokes at Grandma's expense. It was always the same, especially when they thought no one was paying attention. They mocked the way she dressed, the way she spoke, even the way she moved. They imitated her slow, deliberate steps, calling her a poor old thing and laughing behind her back. Can you imagine her trying to use an iPad? One of my cousins snickered. She's probably still figuring out how to send an email. Another cousin joined in, shaking his head. She probably thinks texting is some kind of magic. The laughter echoed around the room. I felt a flush of anger rise in my chest, but I kept quiet. Part of me still felt like I didn't belong with this family, as if I wasn't one of them. They had always been quick to judge Grandma, and I had too. I had joined in the mocking before, because it was easier than standing up for her. But today, it felt different. I wasn't sure what had changed, but something inside of me had shifted. I was starting to see how wrong we all were. Then, the conversation turned toward her money, or what they thought she had. They all assumed she had nothing left, that she had spent everything and was only living off her small pension. No one had any idea of the life she had led before, or how much she had saved over the years. It wasn't about luxury or wealth, but about careful choices and living simply. But none of them saw that. They all assumed that because she was old and out of touch, she had nothing of value to offer. "She'll probably leave us some junk," one of my uncles said with a laugh. "Maybe a couple of old china plates, some dusty books. And her house," my aunt added, "it'll probably be full of clutter. I bet we'll have to throw half of it away." They all laughed, but I couldn't join in. I felt sick to my stomach, the way they talked about her like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. I had seen the house through different eyes in the past few days. It wasn't just some old, rundown place. It was full of memories, full of things that told the story of her life. I had started to see the value in those things, even if they didn't have a high price tag. The old photographs, the worn-out furniture, the little trinkets she had collected, all of them meant something. But as the laughter continued around me, I knew that none of my family would ever understand. They were too caught up in their own selfish desires, too focused on what they could gain. It wasn't just about Grandma anymore. It was about the money, the property, the inheritance. They didn't see the heart of it, the love and care that had gone into everything she had done. All they saw was a chance to get ahead, a chance to take something they thought they were owed. As the conversation died down, I felt a strange sense of sadness wash over me. I wanted to say something, to defend her, but I didn't. I wasn't sure what to say or how to make them see what I was starting to understand. How could I explain that Grandma's worth wasn't in her possessions or in her bank account? It was in her kindness, in the way she had always given without asking for anything in return. The room grew quieter, and I could feel the shift in the air, the awkward silence hanging over us. They all knew, deep down, that Grandma didn't have much left, and yet they were all still waiting, hoping for something more. I couldn't understand it. But I knew one thing for sure: when the time came, they wouldn't be prepared for what Grandma had left behind. They had no idea how wrong they were about her, about the value of her life and everything she had done. It was a rainy morning when the lawyer came. The family had gathered in Grandma's living room, the same room where we had all spent so many holidays together, where we had laughed, eaten, and shared memories. But today, the atmosphere was different. There was no laughter, no chatter, only a tense silence as everyone waited for the lawyer to arrive with the will. I could feel the nervous energy in the room. Everyone had their own thoughts about what Grandma might have left behind. Some of them probably thought they'd be getting a nice sum of money, or at least a piece of the house. Others might have been hoping for her jewelry or the few heirlooms she had kept for so many years. But deep down, I knew Grandma. She wasn't the kind of person who cared about wealth or material things. She cared about people, about giving back, about making the world a better place. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The lawyer, a serious-looking man in a dark suit, stepped into the room. He had been Grandma's lawyer for years, and he looked just as out of place in our small family gathering as the rest of us felt. He cleared his throat and, without any small talk, began to speak. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steady but formal. "I'm here to read the last will and testament of Martha Jean Miller." There was a brief silence as everyone exchanged looks. The will was being read out loud, and no one knew exactly what to expect. I tried to keep my face calm, but inside, I was nervous. I didn't know if Grandma had left anything to me, and if she had, what it would be. I felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread. The lawyer opened the will and began reading. He first mentioned a few small gifts to distant relatives, a bracelet to an aunt, a painting to a cousin who loved art. Then he paused. I could see everyone leaning forward, waiting for the big reveal. Who would get the house? Who would inherit her savings? Who would get the things that had been passed down for generations? But instead of what anyone expected, the lawyer continued, "To my family, I leave nothing." The room went dead silent. The air seemed to freeze, and everyone looked at each other in confusion. The lawyer wasn't done, but those words hung in the air like a weight. No one spoke. I could see the shock on my relatives' faces, their mouths open, trying to process what they had just heard. "My estate," the lawyer went on, "is to be donated to an organization that supports education for young women, the arts, and environmental causes. The funds from my savings and the sale of my house will be used to support scholarships for underprivileged students, fund programs for aspiring artists, and promote green initiatives that protect the earth. This is my final wish." I sat there in stunned silence, feeling the weight of her words sink in. Everyone else seemed to be in disbelief, their shock slowly turning into frustration. Some whispered angrily under their breath. Others looked furious. There were gasps of disbelief, followed by harsh whispers. "What do you mean, nothing?" One of my uncles blurted out, "What about the house? What about the money?" The lawyer didn't seem fazed. "As stated, all of Martha's wealth is being directed toward these causes. There is nothing left for the family." Another relative, a cousin, slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. We're her family. How could she leave everything to some charity?" The tension in the room was palpable. It was clear that no one had expected this, and they weren't happy about it. They had all assumed that Grandma, despite her quiet ways, would leave something substantial for them, something to show for the years they had spent barely acknowledging her existence. But now, that wasn't the case at all. I looked around at their angry faces, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew that Grandma had done something they would never understand. She had spent her life caring for others, giving what little she had, and now she had chosen to continue that legacy. She hadn't left behind wealth, but something far more valuable, an example of selflessness, a reminder of what really mattered. While my relatives were still processing the news, I couldn't help but feel a wave of respect for Grandma. She had chosen to leave behind a legacy of giving, of caring for the world, in ways that mattered more than any material possessions. Her decision was bold, and in its own quiet way, it was more powerful than anything money could buy. As the lawyer finished reading the rest of the will, my family was still in shock, whispering angrily amongst themselves. I sat quietly, trying to process everything. I didn't know what Grandma had seen in me, but part of me knew that she had wanted me to understand the true value of life, not what we could take, but what we could give. The days after the will was read were strange. The family, once so close, now seemed more distant than ever. Everyone was upset, angry even, about Grandma's decision to leave her wealth to charity. Some of them tried to justify their feelings, saying it wasn't fair, that she owed them something after all these years. Others quietly sulked, pretending it didn't matter to them. But the tension was thick. Family gatherings became awkward. Conversations were short, and there was a sense of unease hanging in the air. I kept to myself mostly, not knowing what to say. I could see my relatives clearly now, their disappointment almost palpable. They were all focused on the material things, what they thought they should have gotten. It was like they had never really known her, never really understood what made her so special. And even though I didn't say anything, it hurt me to see them like that. It hurt to know that none of them seemed to grasp what Grandma had left behind, not just in her will, but in the way she had lived her life. I went back to Grandma's house a few days after the will reading. The house was quieter now, emptier. Most of the family had stopped coming by, probably because they didn't know how to deal with the fact that Grandma had left them nothing. I had spent more time in the house recently than I had in years, and for the first time, it felt like a place full of meaning, a place full of stories and memories. I wandered through the rooms, touching things as I went, old books on the shelves, family photos on the walls, the worn armchair Grandma had sat in so many times. It felt strange, knowing that none of these things would stay in the family. They would all be sold or donated, part of the legacy that Grandma had chosen to give to the world instead of to us. But I wasn't sad about it. I knew it was what she wanted. What she had left us wasn't things, wasn't possessions. It was a lesson. A lesson in generosity, in selflessness, and in living a life that mattered for reasons beyond money. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one where we had all gathered for meals over the years. It seemed so ordinary, but in that moment, it felt like one of the most important places in the world. This was where Grandma had shared her wisdom, where she had made her mark, not through wealth or possessions, but through love and care. She had always been there, always offered a listening ear, a comforting word, and a helping hand. I thought about all the things she had done for me over the years, all the quiet ways she had shown her love. It wasn't about big gestures or fancy gifts. It was in the small moments. The times she had let me vent when I was upset, the times she had given me advice, the times she had simply sat with me when I needed company. It was in the little things, and I had taken it all for granted. I had been so focused on what I didn't have, what I wanted, that I hadn't stopped to appreciate the true gifts she had given me. As I sat there, I made a promise to myself. I would not let Grandma's legacy fade away. I would take the lessons she had taught me and carry them forward, not just for my own sake, but for the world. Her final wish to support education, the arts, and the environment. It was a reminder that there was more to life than what we could take from it. There was a world outside of our own desires, a world that needed kindness, compassion, and people willing to make a difference. I decided to visit the charity that Grandma had left her money to. I wanted to understand more about it, to see how it was making an impact on the world. I knew it was important to her, and I wanted to honor her memory by seeing the good she had chosen to do. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the difference she could make, the lives she could touch long after she was gone. When I arrived at the organization, I was amazed by what I saw. There were so many people, young women, artists, environmental activists, who were being supported by Grandma's donation. I could see the impact of her choice, how her legacy was continuing to touch lives in ways that I hadn't even imagined. It was more than I could have ever hoped for. It made me realize that Grandma had done something truly remarkable. She had changed the world, not with money or possessions, but with her heart. I walked out of the building feeling different. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was proud. Proud of the woman Grandma had been, and proud of the life she had lived. She had left a mark on the world, not through things, but through love, kindness, and generosity. And that was something no one could ever take away. As the weeks went by, something inside me began to shift. I couldn't stop thinking about what Grandma had left behind, and how her life had been so different from the one I had been living. She had always been so focused on giving, on helping others, and on living with purpose. I had been focused on myself, on getting ahead, on what I could gain. But now, as I reflected on everything, I realized how empty that way of living felt. I found myself starting to change. I began volunteering at the same charity Grandma had supported. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but it felt like the right thing to do. At first, I was nervous, unsure of how I could help or if I could really make a difference. But soon, I started to understand. It wasn't about doing something huge or grand. It was about the small things. Listening to someone who needed to talk, helping with simple tasks, or just showing up when it mattered. Those small actions added up to something bigger than I could have imagined. Over time, I started to build connections with the people I met at the charity. There was a group of young women who had been given scholarships thanks to Grandma's donation. They were all so full of hope, determined to make something of themselves, despite the challenges they had faced in life. I began to see how much one person's generosity could really change lives. They had all been given a chance, and now they were working hard to make the most of it. There was one woman in particular who stood out to me. Her name was Emily, and she had received a scholarship to study environmental science. She told me her story one afternoon as we sat in the break room. She had grown up in a small town where opportunities were limited and had struggled to get through school. But thanks to the scholarship, she was now studying at a university, pursuing her dream of helping the planet. She was passionate about her work and wanted to make a difference, just like Grandma had. "If it weren't for people like your grandma," Emily said, "I wouldn't be here. She gave me the chance to change my life, to follow my dreams. I don't know what I would have done without her." Hearing that made me feel something deep inside. It was a mixture of pride and awe. Grandma had never sought recognition, never expected anyone to thank her. But hearing Emily's story made me realize how far her generosity had gone. It wasn't just about the money she had left behind. It was about the lives she had touched, the doors she had opened for people who otherwise wouldn't have had a chance. I began to understand that giving, in any form, was a way of making the world better. It wasn't about receiving or getting something in return. It was about helping others, offering support, and using whatever resources you had to make a positive impact. It was about love in action, not just in words. As I continued to volunteer, I started to feel a sense of fulfillment that I had never experienced before. I wasn't looking for praise, and I wasn't expecting anything in return. I was simply doing what felt right. I still didn't have everything figured out, but I felt more connected to the world, more in tune with the needs of others. I started to realize that true happiness didn't come from what I could gain, but from what I could give. My family, on the other hand, remained caught up in their frustration and anger over the will. They still couldn't see what Grandma had truly left behind, and it hurt me to watch them struggle with it. But as time passed, I became less focused on what they thought and more focused on what I could do. I knew I couldn't change the way they felt, but I could change the way I lived. I could honor Grandma's memory by following her example, by living a life of purpose and kindness. One evening, after another long day of volunteering, I returned to Grandma's house. The house still felt empty, but it also felt like a place of peace. I sat down in the living room, looking around at the familiar walls, the old furniture, and the photos of family. I realized that the house wasn't empty at all. It was filled with memories, with love, and with lessons that would stay with me forever. Grandma had shown me the way, and now it was up to me to carry that torch forward. As I sat there, I made a promise to myself. I would continue to live a life that mattered, not for the sake of getting ahead, but for the sake of helping others. I would honor Grandma's legacy by living with love, generosity, and purpose, because I had finally understood that the most important things in life aren't the ones you can hold in your hands. They're the ones you carry in your heart. It had been a few months since the reading of Grandma's will, and things had started to settle down. My family, though still confused about Grandma's choices, seemed to be moving on with their lives. The anger had faded, but there was still a sense of discomfort when we gathered together. Most of my relatives avoided talking about the will, and whenever they did, it was with a mix of bitterness and confusion. But for me, things had changed in ways I never expected. I had learned so much from Grandma, not just from her will, but from everything she had done throughout her life. She had always been quiet, never seeking attention, but her actions had spoken volumes. I could see now that the true value of life wasn't in the things we collected or the money we earned. It was in the impact we had on others. I had started living differently, and even though I still had a long way to go, I knew I was on the right path. One afternoon, as I was finishing up my shift at the charity, I ran into Emily again. She was carrying a stack of papers, her face lit up with excitement. When she saw me, she immediately walked over, her eyes bright. "Hey, guess what?" she asked, her voice full of enthusiasm. "I just got an internship with a company that focuses on environmental research. It's everything I've been working for, and I couldn't have gotten here without the scholarship your grandma helped make possible. I just wanted to thank you again." I smiled, feeling the warmth spread through me. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "It was Grandma's vision, not mine. She's the one who made all of this possible." "But it was your support too," Emily replied. "I've been thinking about how much she has inspired me. Her generosity wasn't just about money. It was about giving people like me a chance, a way to change our futures." I felt a lump form in my throat. It was hard to explain just how much that meant to me, hearing that someone else had been inspired by Grandma's actions. I had seen her as this quiet, almost invisible figure in my life, but now, through Emily and the others at the charity, I was starting to realize how big her heart had been, how far her love and support had reached. "I think she would have been so proud of you," I said, my voice soft. "You're doing exactly what she hoped for, making the world a better place." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I hope so. I want to make her proud." The conversation stuck with me for days. I couldn't stop thinking about how one person's kindness could ripple out and touch so many lives. Grandma had given not just money, but hope, the chance for someone like Emily to pursue her dreams. It made me realize that it wasn't too late for me to do something similar, to make my own mark on the world in a way that mattered. Over the next few weeks, I became even more involved in the charity. I started organizing events, reaching out to other people who might be able to help, and sharing the story of Grandma's generosity with others. I wanted people to understand that the real gift wasn't just the money. It was the belief that everyone deserved a chance, the encouragement to reach higher and push forward, no matter the obstacles. One day, as I was talking to a few volunteers at the charity, a thought crossed my mind. I realized that this was the legacy Grandma had left, not just in her will, but in the way she had lived her life. She hadn't just wanted to help people in the moment. She had wanted to inspire them to help others, to continue the cycle of giving. And in doing so, she had created something lasting, something that would live on far beyond her own lifetime. I knew that I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the way my family had treated Grandma. But I could change my own future. I could live with the same values she had shown me: compassion, generosity, and a commitment to making a difference. I could follow her example and create a life that mattered, not through wealth or status, but through the people I helped and the love I gave. As the months passed, I found that the more I gave, the more fulfilled I felt. I was no longer focused on what I could get, but on what I could offer. And in that, I found a deep sense of peace. I didn't need money or material things to feel successful. I just needed to know that I had made a difference, no matter how small it seemed. Grandma's legacy was no longer just something I admired from afar. It had become something I lived by, something that was now part of who I was. And with every day that passed, I felt more connected to her, more sure of the path I was walking. It wasn't the easiest path, but it was the one that mattered. And that was all that counted. It had been almost a year since Grandma had passed away, and so much had changed in my life. I had spent months reflecting on the lessons she had left behind, not just in her will, but in the way she had lived. At first, I had been upset, unsure of why she would leave everything to charity. But now, looking back, I understood. Grandma had given me a gift far greater than anything money could buy. She had shown me how to live with purpose, how to love without expecting anything in return, and how to make a difference in the world. The charity that Grandma had supported continued to thrive, and I was proud to be a part of it. Every day, I worked alongside people who were passionate about making the world a better place, and it was clear to me now that the work we were doing was changing lives. I wasn't just volunteering anymore. I was fully invested in the cause. I had become more involved in organizing events, raising awareness, and even starting a fundraising campaign in Grandma's name. The more I gave, the more I received: peace, purpose, and the knowledge that I was living a life that truly mattered. One day, as I was going through some old boxes of Grandma's things, I came across a letter. It was addressed to me, and it was in her handwriting. My heart skipped a beat as I carefully unfolded the paper. The letter was short, but filled with so much love and wisdom. "Dear my name," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. But know that my love for you never ends. I've watched you grow, and I'm so proud of the person you've become. Remember, life isn't about what you have or what you get. It's about what you give. You are capable of amazing things, and I believe in you more than you can ever imagine. I want you to live with kindness, to always reach out to others, and to never forget that the true wealth in life is found in the hearts we touch." As I read the letter, tears filled my eyes. It was like Grandma was speaking directly to me, even though she was gone. I had always known she loved me, but reading her words, I could feel her presence more than ever. I was reminded once again of her selflessness, her unwavering belief in the power of giving, and how much she had shaped the person I had become. I spent the next few days reflecting on everything she had said, thinking about how much I had changed. I realized that I had spent so many years searching for answers in the wrong places. I had thought that happiness came from success or material wealth, but now I understood that true fulfillment came from helping others, from making a positive impact on the world. The more I thought about it, the more I knew that I wanted to carry on Grandma's legacy in the best way I could. I had seen firsthand how her contributions had changed lives, and I wanted to do the same. I started thinking about new ways to reach out to even more people, to give others the chance that Grandma had given to so many. I reached out to local schools to set up scholarship programs, hoping to give young people the same opportunities Emily had received. I began working with environmental groups, just as Grandma had hoped, to protect the planet and create a better future for everyone. And as I did all this, I felt a sense of peace. I had finally found my purpose, and it wasn't something that came from money or status. It came from helping others, from living with compassion, and from sharing the love that Grandma had shown me. I wasn't just honoring her memory anymore. I was living out the lessons she had taught me every day. One evening, as I stood in front of a group of young people at a charity event, sharing the story of Grandma's life and her impact, I felt a deep sense of pride. I could see the hope in their eyes, the same hope that Emily had once had. And I realized that through all the pain and confusion of the past, Grandma had given me the strength to find my way. I was no longer lost, no longer searching for something that couldn't be found. I had found the answer in the life I was now living. A life of giving, of loving, and of making the world a better place, just as Grandma had always wanted. As the crowd cheered and clapped, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Grandma had passed on, but her legacy was alive and well. And as long as I lived, I would continue to carry it forward, one small act of kindness at a time.